Hi, folks. This is Mark by Mark A. Foster, Ph.D. for the Institute for Dialectical Meta-Realism. Let's get rolling. Is the United States a police state? I will leave a link directly below this video by a young man whom I deeply respect, who comments on that in an extremely intelligent way, and I will let you decide for yourself after watching his excellent video presentation. My answer would be yes, and here's why. Well, aside from reading the news and listening to the news and commentary on YouTube, back when I was 12 years old and a member of the Students' Democratic Coalition, a part of the New Left, as it was called, and as we still call it today. One of our major projects in our chapter in my junior high school, a term commonly used back then, was to support the work of Cesar Chavez and the Migrant Workers Union. One of the ways that we did that is by going to a supermarket in the area and picketing behind, not in front, but behind the supermarket, and trying to get people to sign petitions pledging that they would no longer buy California grapes in order to protest the extremely low wages and lack of benefits to migrant workers working on California grape farms. Well, guess what? Yes, the FBI showed up in plain clothes. Well, I'm not sure if they have anything else but plain clothes, but they were plain clothed nonetheless. And they came up to us and they said, you need to keep on walking in a circle. And I thought to myself, well, if we are walking in a circle, we can't hand out petitions. That was the idea. So whenever any of us would briefly slow down to hand somebody a petition to sign to get people to boycott California grapes, you got it right. An FBI agent would stop us and say, no, you need to keep on moving in a circle. In other words, the police, as is their usual function, was protecting the bourgeoisie. They were protecting the capitalists. In this case, they were protecting the owners of grape farms, which were themselves breaking the law by hiring undocumented workers and paying them off the books. But that wasn't the police's primary concern. No, their concern was that we were trying to defend Mexican migrant workers and work against the owners of those grape farms. That was all they cared about. In case you haven't noticed, a lot of relatively small communities have gotten military supplies like tanks, armored carriers, rifles of enormous size and machine guns, things that ordinarily you would only expect to see in the military. That's not true anymore. Now, the smallest local police departments have these extensive amounts of military supplies, and they use them, and they arrest people, and they use them on people who are being arrested for pot, yeah, for pot, things like that, or anything they can think of. They seem to want to use their military supplies. It is like they have been suddenly given a new set of toys. And perhaps that is what it feels to them. I don't know. I have never been a cop, nor would I ever be one, nor would any police department in its right mind ever hire me to be a police officer. Plus, At 68 years old, I am now way too old to even be considered for such a job. But even when I was younger, I would be the last person, or one of the last people, that any police department would consider hiring to be on its force. That is clear. They do not want commies working on a police force, and for that matter, I would not want to be on their police force. On another occasion, and I mentioned this before in a previous video, I had a good friend in Orangeburg, South Carolina. His name was Jack. His wife's name was Hattie. They were both African Americans. They lived in a small home in a entirely black area of Orangeburg. And as was ordinarily the case, and to some extent still is, as a relic from the past, there was a set of train tracks on one side of the train tracks. The street was called by one name. That was the African American side. On the other side of the train tracks, the same street was called by an entirely different name. That was the European American part of the town. And so obviously, black was was not considered to be a very positive thing to be in most of the Deep South. And I got to know that very quickly when I started doing civil rights work in South Carolina, traveling throughout the South, primarily Orangeburg, Mullins, and Saluda, but also other parts of South Carolina. It was a real eye-opener for me at 14 and 15 years old. 3 years, 3 years after I had engaged in that protest behind the supermarket in Nassau County, Long Island, in the state of New York. One day, I was walking by to see my friend Jack, and yes, I considered him to be a friend. He was about maybe 30, 40 years older than me. So to me, he was an old man, but he was a lot younger than I am right now at 68. And his wife, Hattie, answered the door. And I was surprised that there was a Christmas wreath hanging from their front door. And so I said what in retrospect was an entirely inappropriate thing, but not intentionally, meaning I was not speaking out of malice. I said to Hattie, I said, it's a bit early to be celebrating Christmas. Hattie said, Mark, Jack got shot today. My heart stopped for a moment. I just stood there gazing at her, not knowing what to say at first. Then maybe after what seemed like an eternity, but was most likely no more than 5 or 10 seconds, I said, I am so sorry. I am so sorry. I got home and I got more details on what happened at that basketball game that Jack had attended. Jack loved basketball, high school basketball. He would always get there early so he would get a seat in the front bleachers. So this day was no exception. When he was sitting in the front bleachers, a deputy sheriff walked up to him and said, Jack, I want your seat. And Jack said, no, I'm not going to give you my seat. It's my seat. Find your own seat. Jack was courageous. Jack was very courageous, much more courageous than most African Americans were at that time. For that reason, Jack was constantly being warned by his friends. But Jack was a man of principle, and he didn't care. And so he regularly threw caution to the wind. The deputy came back to him and said, Jack, I want your seat." And Jack looked at him again and said, "No." At that point, the deputy pulled out his revolver and shot Jack point blank in the head. Jack was dead on the spot. That was the end of that wonderful man's life. A life that was taken away by somebody who faced no consequences for his actions. As was protocol, the deputy was arrested, held in jail overnight. The DA did not press charges, and so the deputy was released the following morning and was then right back on the force. Was that unusual? No. Up until that time, and some years later, not a single white person had ever been convicted in the Deep South for murdering a black person. That is still true, not entirely, but to a large extent today, especially with police officers. So, to my question, is this a police state that I am living in? And I have only given you two examples that related directly to me. My answer is, indeed, it is. How could anyone in her or his right mind ever say that the United States is not a police state? So we need to confront that, to realize that the United States, as the head of the beast of the imperialist first world, is a police state, as are some other countries in the first world as well, but certainly not as much as the US. The wealthiest country in the world, the country with the largest military in the world, and if you listen to politicians, the greatest country in the world. America may be many things, but that is surely not one of them. The US is surely not even close to being the greatest country in the world. In fact, in my view, it should be placed way down on the bottom of the list. Now, wrapping up, this has been Mark by Mark A. Foster, Ph.D., for the Institute for Dialectical Meta-Realism. Have a pleasant day and an even better day tomorrow.